Right, a very warm welcome back if you've just tuned in. September is Heritage Month in South Africa, and today we're taking a look at the very important issue of the role of traditional leaders in the country. What role do they play? They know that they certainly are still active, and we heard a little bit earlier on that people still rely on them. So the question is, in a society that's becoming more and more modern, what are some of the challenges that they're facing? And government, what role is government playing in terms of policy and allocation of resources in making sure that they're able to do their work? Just before the break, Minister Rooyen had to leave us. He had to go to a cabinet meeting, but we do have a new guest now, Kgosi PP Maubane of the Bapela Bamucha in Morotele. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to the program to you.
Thank you, Peter, and happy Heritage Month to the viewers.
All right, so I know that you were sitting in the audience just before the break, and you heard some of the comments that were made. And I'm just wondering what some of your opening thoughts might be as we take a look at the role of traditional leaders, particularly in a modern society.
First and foremost, let me reiterate the position of traditional leaders in general. And that is the belief that tradition, customs, and cultures of the African people contains precious jewels that must be protected, preserved, and promoted for the future generations. And as a statutory body, the National House tries to sift those practices that are consistent with the Constitution and discourage those that are harmful, gender insensitive, trample on the human rights, and so on. So we are promoting those that are really consistent with the Constitution.
All right. I know you're the chairperson of the National House of Traditional Leaders, and one of the things that you do is you engage government to tell them what you need, and also, I guess, to have a conversation about, as you said, to reinforce the role of traditional leaders. And I'm wondering, is government listening to you?
Well, to an extent, government is doing its best, I suppose, but it's still a tall order. There are many challenges facing the institution, wherein we need the support of government, especially at local level, where we have our traditional councils, which needs to be supported because the financial muscles that used to be there has been cut off, and there's a very dear need for such councils to stand up and be supported, both financially and otherwise. Yes.
Okay, Hosi, let me turn to you, and I'm looking at you, and I'm proud that women are rising to leadership positions, particularly in the traditional setup. And I'm just wondering, what are some of the challenges that you're facing as a leader in terms of the Constitution is there, the laws are there, so a lot of the cases and issues you used to deal with before have almost been taken away from you by the law. Do you still have an opportunity to deal with the day-to-day issues, settling disputes, or are you finding that your role is becoming more and more ceremonial as time passes?
Thank you, Peter. I think, let me start with the ceremonial part of it. Yeah. Yes, we do the ceremonial part of it, but I think in a rural community, settling of disputes, as an example, we have a community court, as it is now, where people come nearly every week to bring, some minor petty disputes which otherwise would go to the magistrates and what have you. Much important that at that type of a court is restorative. It's not that after you have a court decision, a judgment, You say 6 months to jail, which after going to jail, the civil court come back, but it has not restored anything. But in our community courts, which I preside, I find it very democratic because it's not just the offender or the victim who are just silent. We have a prosecutor, although he's not an educated prosecutor, but we do it the old democratic way where they listen and then they assess the case and they say maybe the offender has time to say something and the victim has time to say something. And probably at the end of the day, when I look at it, I say to myself, what is it that can make a social cohesion in the community? As custodian of the customs in the community, we still have to make sure everybody is at ease, because this constitution has given everyone to be free. So maybe we have our judgment saying that you're going to community within the school or you restore what has been taken from the victim. If it is a sheep which has been stolen, maybe take back the sheep. I find the royal leaders or traditional leaders having a very important role. And as a woman, I find no difference in what a man could be doing in her community. Because my people, I don't take them as subjects, I take them as citizens of this country. So we plan together, I move along with them. Don't leave them behind, don't let them go in front.
All right. Okay, we're going to fix your microphone because I think some of the things you're saying are quite important, and we'll revisit that. But Hosi Pilani, I'm trying to get a sense of, because it's 2016, and the young people nowadays, a lot of them didn't grow up in the rural areas where a lot of these traditions continue to be preserved. And your kingdom, as it were, kind of straddles modern cities, but also at the same time there's still some rural parts that you watch over. The society that's coming through now, particularly young people, do they recognize your Khosiness, as it were? Or or is it something that you're finding challenging to make sure that we continue to place your role, your position, your title, and your, I would say even, I guess, divinity in your community?
Yes, Peter, it's true. In the modern society, I think there's a little bit of challenge, but it has to be managed. Because what is happening is people construe a culture to be like static. But it's not like that. We move with times. So culture evolves and accommodate changes. And therefore, it cannot be seen to be as 100 years like ago. You will always move with times. And that is why today we are even wearing modern clothes. So that shows how culture evolves. And how it evolves, it depends on the environment. On other areas, it can go slower. On the other areas, it can go faster depending on the environment that is pertaining to the certain areas. So I think we must, when we talk of culture and custom, not be stuck to the eras of 100 years ago. And that is why we have even now, even in our constitution, now accommodated the women participation. So I think that's what people should understand when you talk of culture.
All right, so you talk about accommodating women, and that is a nice, wonderful development. But is this not the westernization of some of our traditional practices? Because it wouldn't have happened 100 years ago, maybe.
No, I'm sorry, unfortunately, that's how it was misconstrued.
Right.
Even where a woman leader or a woman could not be a leader, they would still be part of the development,
right,
part of the leadership. There are Khadis, the Malumes, and all those. So it's like in a family environment where each and every member of the family participates, and he's got, or they have their own role to play. So it is only the difference between the roles that one would play. But they had always been allowed to participate up to the highest rank.
Okay. Deputy Minister, we talk about allocation of resources. They get paid, they get resources that come from the taxpayer. Who brings them to account for what they do on behalf of the taxpayer?
Well, the Department of Traditional Affairs has a system of ensuring accountability of the money that is being given to traditional councils, which is the money that's supposed to serve communities and then to enable the structure to function. Though it's not enough, but there is accounting processes. The Auditor General also comes in to inspect the books, and that therefore involves that we need to train and keep on training those who are running the account and those who are dispensing the resources on the ground so that they are as compliant. So they therefore are accountable like anybody else when it comes to public purse. But then there will also be business ventures that then arises in those communities, because everything that happens in that community, if is the resources from the land belongs to the collective. The traditional leader is at the head and the community is there. So whatever is produced from the land, they ought to also to share and then be transparent so that they can say so much was able to be gathered, and then therefore this is going to go for administration, this goes to the development of the area, and then the community must be informed and then be reported on so that the tensions that are there are minimized, because currently, unfortunately, in some areas, things have happened which we are now beginning to look at the sector and say, let's come together, as the minister said, to really discuss some of the challenges that are stubborn, some of the challenges that are continuing, and so that we could arrest and ensure, therefore, that the sector is given that dignity in society. When people look at you, they must look at honorable and dignified people in society.
All right, so the accounting of funds is easy because money in, all that kind of thing is fine. But what do you do with some of these leaders who become almost dictators and are delinquent? How do you manage those?
Well, we are talking to the traditional leaders. They are talking amongst themselves. They are also remodeling the sector to be modernized so that it could then coexist within a democratic dispensation. And that is an ongoing discussion. But also, we are also seeing in the sector a younger generation come in. I think later, Kgosi Mkhize from KwaZulu-Natal will be coming in. You will see the young face, they wear swanky, nice handkerchiefs. And then you can then be, because people look at traditional leaders as this old grade and old women. No. Youngsters are there. And I'm going to be establishing a forum called the Young Leopards Forum. Because leopard is what is representing the sector. So that then begins to see that there's modernization. And when the relationship with the councils on the ground, which was another important thing. Deputy Minister Andries Nel deals with the harmonization of relationship between traditional leaders and the councils and their participation in the council. It's also an ongoing process where we are beginning to strengthen even that particular area. And I must thank the media too, that we are also beginning to exhibit, and where there's a problem, you expose it. And when we are able to follow, I remember I was phoning the chairperson of the Limpopo, Hosi, and say, there's a traditional leader that is charging too much for bearing of the people. And he said, no, that can't happen. And I then said, follow it up. Indeed, it was true that was happening. And once we see such reports, we say to them, go and provide leadership on that one. And then media also move on, go. I think it's one that is bringing closer the sector. We have 6 million viewers. And we've got Maduba there, who's acting as Vele and Mubango, the second wife of Asundin. So I also want to say, how do we then begin to use it as an educational platform for people to embrace our culture, but also embrace modernity?
All right, so Hosi, Maubane, there are these structures to bring order in this sector, and I'm just wondering, how dare they tell a king how to spend his money? How dare they ask you to account for your funds? Surely the person you answer to is God alone.
I don't agree with you. Yes, mainly because traditional leader doesn't act on himself. He acts on behalf of the community. And therefore, we must earn the trust of community. So accountability is paramount. Let me just also expatiate on what Kgosi Pilano just mentioned, the evolvement of the institution. Just to cite an example is that in the olden days, they will use just an example of a roof of a house. That in the olden days, we have a beehive kind of a roof. And then it was followed by a grass thatch one, the thatch house, and then later on we move into zinc and then to tiles. But it remains a roof. So it's an involvement, or like the traditional leadership evolves with the times. It can be a different form. We can live in the past, of course, but a different form today, but still serve the same purpose of being a roof.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll explore more, but I'd like to hear from our audience, and we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll start looking at your tweets and also get questions from the floor, the audience that's here with us. And let's just continue with this discussion. What are your thoughts about royalty, traditional leaders in a modern society? Is it an institution that continues to be important to you? Do you rely on them? Do you use them? And should they be given more powers? Your thoughts after this.